They saw it before they could truly believe it, an ocean that once belonged to the German U-boats now filled with an endless line of American ships. From the cliffs of occupied France to the naval command rooms deep inside Berlin, German generals stared at reports that felt impossible. Convoy after convoy was crossing the Atlantic, and they weren't stopping. Hundreds of cargo ships, escorted by destroyers, aircraft carriers, and long-range patrol bombers, an industrial tide so massive that no U-boat wolfpack could tear it apart. For the first time, fear crept into the minds of the German High Command. Admiral Donitz warned that the Allies were producing ships faster than Germany could sink them. Generals whispered that America was fighting a war of factories, a war Germany could never win. And as the convoys grew, one terrifying truth spread through German ranks. The Atlantic had turned against them. Welcome back to the channel, where we uncover the untold stories and hidden turning points of the Second World War. Today, we dive into one of the most underestimated, yet decisive, battles of the entire conflict, the struggle for the Atlantic. It was not fought with giant tanks or sweeping armies, but with merchant ships, escort fleets, and the raw industrial power of a nation rising at full speed. By the early 1940s, Germany believed the Atlantic was theirs to dominate. U-boats prowled the ocean with deadly confidence, starving Britain of fuel, weapons, and hope. The Kriegsmarine expected the Allies to collapse under pressure. But then came a force unlike anything the German High Command had ever imagined. Across the ocean, American factories roared to life. Massive steel yards worked day and night, launching ship after ship into the waves, so many that it defied every German calculation. Suddenly, the lifeline across the Atlantic was not shrinking, it was multiplying. This is the story of how those endless convoys didn't just carry supplies, they carried the momentum that would eventually break Hitler's war machine. And it all began with a realization that shook German generals to their core. In the early years of the war, the Atlantic was a battlefield of shadows. Long before America's steel convoys dominated the waves, German U-boats ruled with ruthless efficiency. The Kriegsmarine entered the war with a clear strategy: cut off Britain, starve it of food and fuel, and force it to its knees before the United States could fully react. And for a time, that plan worked far better than anyone expected. Between 1939 and 1941, Allied ships were sinking at an alarming rate. Entire convoys vanished without leaving a signal. British sailors called it the Black Pit, that deadly central stretch of the Atlantic where no Allied aircraft could reach. In that vast darkness, U-boat commanders such as Gunther Prien, Otto Kretschmer, and Joachim Schepke became legends inside Germany, celebrated as heroes who held the fate of Europe in their hands. Their submarines struck quickly, silently, and without mercy. Britain, isolated and exhausted, depended on supplies from across the ocean, food from Canada, oil from the Caribbean, and weapons from the United States. Every crate, every gallon, every rifle mattered. A single month of heavy losses could push the island nation to starvation. And in Berlin, German generals believed they were tightening the noose. They had no reason to fear America, yet. The United States was still officially neutral, its military small, its public unsure about entering another global conflict. German intelligence reported that America lacked the capacity to build ships fast enough to make a difference. As long as U-boats continued their relentless hunt, the Atlantic would remain a German stronghold. But underneath that confidence, something was changing across the sea. U.S. factories were expanding at a speed no one had ever seen. Steel production soared, new shipyards appeared almost overnight, and engineers were designing vessels that could be built in mere weeks. America was preparing for a scale of industrial warfare that Germany could not even imagine. The German High Command didn't see the storm coming. Not yet. But the foundations of their control over the Atlantic were already beginning to crack. Everything changed on December 7, 1941. The attack on Pearl Harbor didn't just pull America into the war, it unleashed the full power of the largest industrial machine the world had ever seen. Factories that once built cars, refrigerators, and farm equipment were instantly converted into engines of wartime production. Overnight, the United States shifted from peacetime hesitation to all-out mobilization, and the impact of that transformation was felt most dramatically in the Atlantic. Shipyards from California to Virginia roared with constant activity. Thousands of workers, men and women, veterans and newcomers, labored around the clock in shifts that never ended. Their task was monumental: produce enough ships to replace every Allied vessel sunk by the U-boats, and then build even more. But what stunned German intelligence was not the ambition, it was the speed. American engineers introduced a new miracle of industrial warfare, the Liberty ship. A simple, rugged cargo vessel with a single purpose: carry supplies to Britain as fast as humanly possible. These ships were designed not to last forever, but to be built in weeks, even days. Yard by yard, their production became faster, more efficient, almost mechanical. The record came in 1942, when one Liberty ship was assembled from keel to launch in just 4 days and 15 hours, a number so unbelievable that German command dismissed it as propaganda. But it wasn't. Each day, more ships slid down American slipways and into the water. Each day, more tanks, trucks, fuel drums, aircraft parts, and crates of ammunition were stacked along the docks, ready to cross the ocean. America was not preparing to fight a small war, it was preparing to overwhelm one. In Berlin, the mood shifted from confidence to unease. Reports from U-boat command suggested that the enemy's losses were being replaced faster than they could be inflicted. Admiral Karl Donitz warned that if America continued at this pace, the U-boat strategy would collapse. His concerns grew as Allied escort ships, destroyers, corvettes, and eventually small aircraft carriers, began accompanying the merchant vessels. Germany had entered the war believing that the Atlantic would choke Britain into submission. Instead, America's entry ensured the exact opposite: the lifeline across the ocean was about to become unstoppable. By early 1942, the Atlantic began to transform. What had once been a hunting ground dominated by German U-boats was now filling with the first waves of escorted American and Allied convoys. These weren't scattered merchant ships desperately trying to outrun danger, they were organized, disciplined formations protected by a growing shield of naval power. Convoy after convoy left North American ports: Halifax, New York, Boston, and Norfolk. Each one carried a floating arsenal, tanks strapped to flatbeds, aircraft wings packaged in crates, mountains of ammunition, medical supplies, fuel, and millions of tons of food. Every shipment represented Britain's survival. Every ship that reached the UK strengthened the Allied war effort. At first, the German command remained confident. The U-boat captains believed they could handle it. They struck hard along the east coast, in what the Germans called the second happy time. Hundreds of ships fell victim as America struggled to adapt to submarine warfare. Lights along the coastline made targets glow in the night, defenses were still weak. For a moment, Germany felt the ocean was still theirs. But the situation changed faster than the Germans expected. The United States responded with speed and precision. Shipping lanes were reorganized. Stricter blackout rules were enforced. Coastal waters were patrolled by newly built destroyers and aircraft. And most importantly, convoy escort groups began to strengthen dramatically. British and Canadian escorts joined American warships to create constant, overlapping protection. Radar, sonar, depth charges, and new anti-submarine tactics started turning the tide. Suddenly, those convoys were no longer fragile lines of steel, they were moving fortresses. A single convoy might include 50, 60, even 80 merchant ships, all guarded by destroyers, corvettes, and long-range patrol aircraft circling overhead. U-boats that once approached with confidence now hesitated. U-boats that once approached with confidence now hesitated. Attacking meant facing a coordinated wall of firepower and detection systems that punished even the slightest mistake. German commanders began noticing something unsettling. Despite continued attacks, the number of ships reaching Britain kept rising. Each convoy that landed successfully brought enough supplies to keep entire armies fighting. And then another convoy followed. And another. The Germans realized they weren't facing a temporary surge, they were facing a growing storm of American production that showed no sign of slowing. The Atlantic was beginning to slip from their grasp. By late 1942, something unsettling began creeping into the corridors of German naval command. The early confidence that had defined the U-boat fleet was fading. Patrol reports became increasingly desperate. Messages from submarine captains shifted from triumph to confusion, then to disbelief. Something had changed in the Atlantic, something Germany had not prepared for. For the first time, German generals and admirals faced a reality they had long denied. The enemy was producing ships faster than they could sink them. Every week, American convoys seemed larger, more tightly defended, and more relentless. Where a single U-boat had once terrorized a convoy, now it found itself hunted, forced to dive deep as destroyers closed in with sonar pings echoing through the hull. What was once the hunter was quickly becoming the hunted. Admiral Karl Donitz, the man responsible for Germany's submarine strategy, saw the danger clearly. His intelligence officers brought him numbers that defied logic. In some months, America launched more merchant ships than Germany could build submarines in an entire year. Even worse, each new convoy escort group grew stronger, equipped with advanced radar, high-frequency direction finding, and faster depth charge throwers. Donitz issued warning after warning to the high command. He argued that without a massive increase in U-boats, and without new technology, Germany would lose control of the Atlantic. But by now, German industry was strained to the breaking point. Factories were bombed. Resources were thin. Fuel shortages were growing. And the Luftwaffe could no longer guarantee air cover over critical ports and shipyards. Inside the U-boats themselves, morale began to crack. Crews who once sailed with pride now feared the surface. New Allied aircraft, long-range patrol bombers from Iceland, Greenland, and Canada, closed the deadly air gap that had once protected the submarines. The sky, once distant and harmless, became another enemy. A single radar-equipped aircraft could locate a U-boat miles away, pinning it down until escort ships moved in for the kill. Worse yet, the losses were becoming catastrophic. In 1942 alone, nearly 100 German submarines were destroyed. Veteran commanders were disappearing, some lost with all hands, others captured after brutal depth-charge hunts that shattered their vessels and their nerves. The once elite U-boat arm was bleeding out faster than it could be rebuilt. Internal memos circulated through the Kriegsmarine's headquarters in Berlin revealed a chilling truth: Germany was losing not only submarines, but also the psychological edge that had defined the Battle of the Atlantic. Officers whispered that America was waging not a naval war, but an industrial one, a war of numbers, steel, and factories. And Germany could not compete. The endless American convoys crossing the ocean were more than just ships. To the German high command, they had become symbols of a terrifying reality. No matter how many vessels they destroyed, more would always come. By early 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic reached a breaking point. What had begun as a deadly contest between hunters and prey was becoming something far more decisive. The balance of power shifted, not suddenly, but through a relentless accumulation of technological advances, intelligence breakthroughs, and overwhelming American production. The Germans called it Die Wende, the turning point. The first major shift came quietly, from deep within the world of code-breaking. At Bletchley Park, British cryptanalysts were unlocking the secrets of the German Enigma machine. Every intercepted U-boat message, every patrol route, every operational order slowly became visible to Allied commanders. Convoys began adjusting their courses before danger even arrived, slipping past wolfpacks that waited in vain. German captains complained that their prey was vanishing into thin air, unaware that their own signals were betraying them. Then came the decisive solution to the dreaded air gap, that vast zone in the central Atlantic where U-boats had once been untouchable. The Allies introduced long-range Liberator bombers, escort carriers, and new radar-equipped patrol planes. The moment these aircraft appeared, the ocean changed. U-boats that surfaced to recharge batteries suddenly found a shadow above them, followed by bombs exploding around the hull. The safe zone was gone. Now the hunters were exposed. At sea, the convoys became even more formidable. Escort groups were reorganized, strengthened, and constantly retrained. Destroyers armed with advanced radar and sonar patrolled aggressively. Corvettes moved in swift patterns, ready to launch depth charges at the slightest echo. Hedgehog mortars, new weapons that fired explosive projectiles in precise patterns, turned anti-submarine warfare into a science. Every convoy seemed to carry more escorts, more firepower, and more eyes scanning the waves. For U-boat crews, every patrol felt like a suicide mission. Reports returned to Berlin describing operational chaos, boats cornered in shallow waters, hunted across hundreds of miles, forced to crash dive repeatedly until crews were exhausted and oxygen ran thin. Some submarines never even reached their patrol zones before being destroyed. The statistics told the story brutally. In May 1943, later known as Black May, Germany lost 41 U-boats in a single month. It was the worst defeat in the history of the submarine arm. Dönitz was forced to withdraw his entire fleet from the North Atlantic, admitting that U-boats could no longer operate there safely. For the German High Command, the realization was devastating. The Atlantic, the artery that fed Britain, supplied the Soviets, and prepared the Allied invasion of Europe, was no longer contested. It belonged to the Allies. Endless American convoys were crossing it with growing confidence, delivering the resources that would fuel the final stages of the war. The turning of the Atlantic wasn't just a tactical victory. It marked the moment Germany lost the ability to shape the war's outcome. With the Atlantic firmly under Allied control, the entire course of World War II shifted. What unfolded next was not a series of isolated victories, but a complete transformation of the Allied war effort, powered by the unstoppable flow of American convoys. Each convoy crossing the ocean carried more than supplies, it carried momentum, strength, and the ability to wage war on a scale Germany could not match. For Britain, the impact was immediate and profound. Imports surged back to life, food filled warehouses, fuel stockpiles grew, and factories once crippled by shortages roared with production. No longer starved by U-boats, the island fortress regained its confidence. British shipyards repaired damaged vessels, aviation plants expanded, and tank factories accelerated. The nation that had been on the brink of collapse in 1941 was now preparing for offensive operations. The Soviet Union, fighting desperately on the Eastern Front, also felt the difference. Hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies, fuel, trucks, locomotives, food, aluminum, aircraft, arrived through the Arctic convoys and Persian Gulf routes. American trucks alone transformed Soviet mobility, allowing entire armies to maneuver with speed that shocked German commanders. Every convoy that reached Murmansk or Basra strengthened the Red Army's ability to counterattack. But it was in preparations for the Western Front where the convoy's impact became unmistakable. The supplies landing in Britain formed the backbone of Operation Overlord, D-Day. Millions of tons of equipment were stockpiled, landing craft, tanks, jeeps, bulldozers, medical units, ammunition, portable harbors, and fuel pipelines. Without the constant stream of American convoys, the invasion of Normandy would have been impossible. Meanwhile, Germany faced the opposite reality. Starved of raw materials, low on fuel, and crippled by bombing, its factories struggled to produce weapons at the pace needed to replace losses. U-boats could no longer disrupt Allied supply lines, and tank divisions suffered from chronic fuel shortages. Even the Luftwaffe weakened as synthetic oil plants were destroyed and aviation fuel became scarce. By 1944, German generals understood the terrifying truth. The war was no longer about strategy, it was about volume, and America had more of it than anyone in history. The endless convoys crossing the Atlantic ensured that every Allied offensive had the strength to succeed, and every German defense had the odds stacked against it. The tide of steel and supplies didn't just support the Allies, it crushed the possibility of a German victory forever. In the final years of the war, German generals could only watch as the once dreaded Atlantic became a highway of Allied power. What had begun as scattered merchant ships slipping through danger had transformed into an unstoppable procession, steel giants moving in perfect formation, escorted by aircraft, destroyers, and carriers that stretched from horizon to horizon. The Atlantic no longer whispered with the threat of U-boats, it thundered with the presence of American industry. From their command rooms, German officers studied maps covered with arrows showing the flow of Allied supplies. Every arrow pointed in one direction, toward Europe, toward Germany itself. Their reports grew grim: ammunition shortages, fuel deficits, collapsing divisions, crippled airfields. Meanwhile, across the ocean, American factories poured out tanks, trucks, bombers, rifles, and ships in quantities that defied imagination. The German high command realized they were facing a force no strategy could overcome. Some generals described it as a steel tide. Others called it the shadow of America, a constant reminder that every ship sunk would be replaced many times over. The convoys seemed endless, as if the ocean itself were producing them. With each crossing, they carried not only supplies, but the inevitability of defeat. And as the Allies prepared for the final push into Europe, German officers understood the brutal truth. They had not been defeated simply on the battlefield, but in the factories, shipyards, and assembly lines across the Atlantic. The endless American convoys were more than vessels, they were a promise. A promise that Germany could never outbuild, outlast, or outfight the industrial engine now aimed directly at the heart of the Reich. The Atlantic had chosen its side. And with it, the fate of the war was sealed. Thank you for watching this journey through one of the most decisive struggles of World War II. If you enjoy deep, cinematic history like this, make sure to subscribe and join us for more untold stories from the war that shaped our world. Your support helps us bring these forgotten moments back to life. Stay curious, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next episode.